All right, we're going to start or finish here by talking about environmental disregard. Reagan, as president, suggested that it was okay to pay some damage to the environment. Basically, the thought process was that this was a price that was needed to pay in order to provide jobs and build profits. Um, and this is maybe more of a controversial thing today than it was then. You can see down there, two-thirds of the American public was against Reagan's approach. He also increased the amount of land to be used for oil drilling, mining, and logging. And again, we can say whatever we want to about today in a more secure setting, but we have to remember, like we talked about on Monday in class, the 1970s, two different times the United States went through oil crises and oil shortages, where people couldn't get gasoline in their car and they couldn't afford to fill up their car. And so, Reagan's idea to drill more to get more oil available is I guess better understood when you look at it from the perspective of the 1980s and the uncertainty of the previous time or the previous decade. All right, so when we talk about successes and kind of struggles of the Reagan Revolution, as it's been termed in hindsight, to many people, the American way of life had been restored. Remember, the 1960s and the 1970s were very controversial time periods. They were time periods that, there was a lot of protest, a lot of discontent during this time period, and many Americans were looking for a sense of normal, a return to a calmer lifestyle. And for many Americans, that happens during the Reagan Revolution. That happens during the 1980s, where things kind of seem to settle down. Things seem to get easier as a whole for people. We also see by the mid to late 1980s where the economy picks up again. The economy has been struggling since the time of Gerald Ford, and Reagan kind of gets the reward of that, where the economy gets back to a place where it's doing well, where people are succeeding overall. We see unemployment down to 5.5%, which is the lowest since 1974, the final year before Nixon's resignation. And we've discussed this a little bit, but if unemployment's down that low, typically the public is very supportive of the president, and Reagan was definitely the recipient of positive public opinion um, for the end result of the programs put in place in the 1980s. We talk about shortcomings or kind of some of the negatives of the revolution, of Reagan's revolution. Overall, the tax cuts that he proposed benefited the rich much more than any other group. We see the wealthiest Americans who seemingly get richer during the 1980s. They were the ones who saw their taxes decrease the most. And some of that was because taxes were really, really high for the wealthiest people. But we see the rich kind of see the biggest benefits of this. We see lower classes, those people in the lower class, those people right around the poverty level who are driven deeper into poverty, who are just frankly struggling in the 1980s as a result of some of these things. And having bold there at the end, the deficit by 1985 is up to $212 billion, meaning we lost 212 billion, meaning we lost more than $212 billion, more than we spent just in 1985 alone. So by 1986, Reagan and his administration had run up a total deficit greater than all administrations in U.S. history combined. So you think about a nearly 200-year time period, the deficit was less than it was just from 1981 through 1986. And if we look at where we're at today, as far as the negative or the deficit that we have as a country, over $17 trillion, that begins back in the 1980s, where we begin running up these huge deficits. And the mindset of many politicians that it's okay to have a deficit and it's okay to go further and further in debt begins during this time period.